This is Tony Holowitz from the John Anthony Group, and this is part 2 of our QuickBooks training. And I want to get right back into where we left off. When we last worked in QuickBooks, we were working with a company called RRR Painting Company. And what we had done is we had created an invoice for RRR Painting Company. Now, if you've taken some time in between classes, one of the things you want to keep in mind is you can always go back and look at the other class, the end of the first class, maybe watch the last 10 minutes, and it might make an easier transition into this class. Just bring it up on the screen, fast forward it to the last 10 minutes. The first class was about 28 minutes long. This class will be somewhere in that area. Okay, so we have an invoice on our screen for RRR Painting Company. And what we want to do now is I'm just going to come up and start addressing the issue of what happens when we create an invoice and now we have to get paid. Well, that's a good problem to have. Let's assume for a moment that our painting company sends us a check, and we get that check into our office and we want to record that we've received that check. Now what's going to happen is when we record that check, it's going to take this invoice or an invoice from our painting company out of our receivables, because now we've got it. But one of the dilemmas we face is, where do we put that check that we received? Obviously we will deposit it in a checking account, or we'll most likely deposit it into a checking account. So what I want to do is I want to go in and show you how to create a checking account so that you have a place to deposit that. Then once you do that, we're going to go in and actually make this deposit. So I'll repeat what I've just said. First thing I want to do is I'm going to go up to the toolbar and I'm going to click on List, and I want to go to what's called Chart of Accounts. Chart of Accounts shows me all the accounts I have. The type of accounts they have are over here on the right hand side. Some of these things were set up automatically by QuickBooks, some of the things I've set up. But let's say we want to set up a checking account, and I'm just going to simply call it Tony's Checking. Now normally what you would have done is you would have done all of this long before you sat down to start doing invoices. We're doing a couple things a little bit backwards here. So when I go down to the bottom of the list and click on Account, I'm going to go up and click on New. When I click on New, I have some options. What kind of an account do I want to start? I'm going to click on Bank, and now here in the name I'm going to call it Tony's Checking Account, or just Tony's Checking, just like that. Now you might want to call it, Bank of Boston. Actually, that's a real old bank that's no longer around. Citizens Bank, Bank of America, First National Bank, whatever it might be. You want to make it whatever the name is. Make it so it's easy to understand. One of the options is you can put a description of the account here and a bank account number. Now, probably one of the trickiest parts of what you're going to do here is having to decide on the opening balance. What many people have happen is the opening balance can be a little confusing because sometimes you start using QuickBooks after you've had a checking account in place. The thing I'll say is, again, if you put a balance in that's not 100% correct, you can go back and correct it later on. For example, let's say you think the balance is $1,000, and that's what I'm going to put in here. I'm just going to put in $1,000 as a balance. That was our first deposit. Maybe we just wrote a check to the bank for $1,000, they deposited it. But because it's an ongoing checking account, something that's been in place, what we failed to recognize is the fact that maybe there were 5 outstanding checks, and the value of those checks was, say, $500. So the opening balance really wouldn't be $1,000, it'd be $500. So as you can see, that can be a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is also, I'm going to click on this little blue box right here, because this allows me to go in and change the date of the deposit. I'm going to click on that. When I come to this, I could click on any day in October, or what I could do is I could click on the back arrows to go back through this information, and I'm going to change this to the 1st of January. So we started with the new year. As far as printing checks, I'm not going to get into that right now in today's class, but what you could do is if you're printing checks, let's say you have checks that you've already started printing, or if you're writing checks, you can put it in what check number you want to start printing from, so that when you print out a check, it picks up right where you left off. So even if you had handwritten checks, and say you're up to 1102, here you'd put in 1103, and that's where it would start. So now we have a $1,000 balance. We have a bank account. It's called Tony's Checking, and I'm going to click OK. Now, when we do this, we now have the option up here for Tony's Checking, and I'm going to double click on this and go right to Tony's Checking. And you're going to see that as of 1/1/2007, we have a balance of $1,000. Over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to go back to where it says Create Invoices. These are the open windows, things that I have open. They're hiding behind here, and what I can do is to quickly get to those items. For example, an invoice, I can click on Create Invoices. If I were to close down Invoices completely, that option would be gone. So here we have a invoice from RRR Painting Company. Now, let's say that we get paid a check from RRR Painting Company. I'm going to come up on the toolbar and click on Customers, and when I do that, we come down here and we click on Receive Payments, because we're going to get a check from them. We're going to receive a payment. And I'm going to click on this. And what happens is, because I have that little check in my hands that says RRR Painting Company, well, what would happen is we can up here just type in RRR Painting Company, and I'd started this process in another class. That's why it came right up. And now we can look down here below and see all the open invoices we have with them. Now, if this particular check was for $37.77, and again, that was in there already, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Tab key, and let's treat it like it's today's date. And I'm going to click on today's date, and the date would be September 14th. Oop, let me go ahead a little bit. Be September 14th. Let's say we got the check today. Well, what I'm going to do is when we put in September 14th, that's when it will record that we received the check. I'm going to hit the Tab key again. I'm going to hit it again. I could put in a check number. Let's say it's 1103. We'll use that number again. We could put a memo in, second of two checks, because we actually have another check they owe us. So maybe they sent out the first one or the second one first, or maybe they're crossed in the mail. So I'm typing in second of two checks just as a memo. And now this is the key point of this little transaction. We have to decide where we want to deposit this check. You'll notice there's an option for undeposited funds. We can do that. But for right now, I'm going to disregard that, and I'm going to come up and click on Tony's Checking. Because what we want to do is we want to have this go into the Tony's Checking account. Now let me just talk about logistics for a minute. What occurs is, let's assume that you got the check today, and let's say today's a Monday. And when you get this check, you have decided that you really do not want to deposit this check until Friday. Every Friday you deposit your checks. If that were the case, we could put them with the undeposited funds or undeposited checks, and I'll explain that a little bit more at another time. But let's assume that even though it's Monday and we're going to deposit it on a Friday, let's just say, for the sake of our discussion, we're going to treat it like we deposited it today. Or what we could do is we could change this date to Friday. So maybe if it was Friday the 21st, we could do that. So in other words, when we deposit this check here, it's going to assume that's when we physically deposited it in our actual bank account. So we have some variations there that can get a little confusing, but for today, let's just assume that this check we get is actually going to be deposited on the day we received it. And let's say you do that every day. So now what I'm going to do is come down at the very bottom, and I'm going to click on Save and Close. And when I do that, what that does for me is it allows me to record that that check has been received. Now a couple things occur here. First, when we deposit that check, we have taken that check or that money, those funds, out of our receivables. But if we come back over to Tony's Checking over here on the left and click on this, you're going to see that now that check from our painting company is put in or deposited in our bank account. So it takes it out of our accounts receivable and puts it in our checking account. Let's go back over to create a new check. Let's say we get another check in the mail, a second one. I'm going to come up to where it says Customers. Again, go down to Receive Payments, and it opens up the Receive Payments dialog box. Now, when we do this, most of us, when we work with QuickBooks, will do one of a few things over and over and over again. I want you to notice that my toolbar, if you're used to using QuickBooks, might look a lot different than your toolbar, or there might be subtle differences. Well, let's assume that your job is to create invoices, maybe estimates. You need to look at the receivables, and also you need to receive payments. Now, there are a couple other things you might do, but let's just say that for a moment. Well, this is the receive payment dialog, and if you remember, the way I did it is I went up to customers, and then I went down to receive payments. A couple steps, and just you have a lot of options here. So especially if you're new to QuickBooks, it takes a little time to do that, and I want to make QuickBooks as simple as I possibly can for you. So I want to show you a little trick. Again, we got here by going to customers receive payments, but now that we're here, what we have the ability to do is we can go up to view, and we can go down to add receive payments to icon bar. Now again, we have the receive payments window open. We go to view, add receive payments to icon bar, and I'm going to click on this. What's going to happen is we can now add this window to the icon bar. Now, it's by default called payment. The description is receive payments, but what we can do is we can come down here on the left and create a little icon based on what they have in here. And there's usually one that I'll grab if I can find it real quick. It's just, money. It's just like dollar or something of that nature. There it is. Let's take that little dollar right there. I'm going to click OK, and now that's how we can get to the payment screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this by clicking on the bottom X, and I close the payment screen. So again, let's back up for a moment. All I did there was I created an icon for something I'm going to do over and over and over again. If I get a payment, another payment from RRR Painting Company, I'm going to come up, click on payment, and here comes my screen automatically. I'm going to type in R because it's the first thing, or maybe at this point the only thing we have in our drop down that begins with the letter R. It comes right up. I'm going to hit the tab key, and down below it shows us all the amounts that we have due from this painting company. Now, if by chance this company sent us a partial payment, maybe they only sent us half, we could type in that amount of the payment right here. But what you really want to try to do is match up your payments with the invoice. And where that can get a little confusing is if you have multiple invoices. Also, if you have invoices that have similar prices. If you have an hourly rate, for example, and it's very common for you to bill 4 hours, well, if your hourly rate is $50 an hour, you might have a lot of invoices to RR Painting for $200, 4-hour minimum, $50, $200. So it can get a little confusing, so you want to be clear on that. So at this point, I'm going to type in 375. I'm going to hit the tab key, and it automatically put in the zeros. I'm going to leave today's date. I'm just going to hit the tab key again. I'm not going to fill in the rest of this stuff, but you'll notice because of the last time we deposited stuff from Tony's checking or into Tony's checking, that's what it's assuming we're going to do a second time. So we're putting all that information right into Tony's checking account. We're going to go down and click on Save and Close, and now you'll see there is that deposit of $375. So when we receive a payment, it's very, very easy to take that payment and deposit into the checking account. You just got to remember to run through the bank. You'll be able to catch, again, any mistakes if you forgot to do something when you go to reconcile your checking account. Now, when you are working with customers, a lot of times, one of the things you have to do with customers is doing something called creating invoices, or creating estimates. When I go back to customers, we're going to see right down here, it says create estimates. I want you to observe on the right-hand side on the toolbar, I've already created a shortcut for that. But right now, what I'm going to do is click on create estimates, and we're going to create an estimate. Let's say our painting company decided it wants an estimate from us for a job. Well, again, this looks very, very much like an invoice. So what I'm going to do at this juncture is I'm going to type in RR Painting. Again, it goes right in. I'm going to hit the tab key, and again, I'm just going to keep hitting the tab. Now, we can customize the template, just so you know that. I'm not going to spend time on that today because that can get a little time consuming, but I want you to know you can do that. Hit the tab key again. We'll leave today's date, estimate, just keep going right through until we get down to item. Now this looks so much like your invoice that sometimes people can find it a little confusing. But if we need to send them an estimate, as some businesses do, what occurs next is we're going to click on this drop down to see some of the things we have in our drop down list. You'll remember earlier, if we want to add new items, as we add them, we'll be adding them to this list permanently. So because you're adding them to the list permanently, you want to think them through. What do you want to call it? Let's say that purple widgets is what we need an estimate on. Okay. As I start typing ahead, it starts to recognize what I'm typing. When you feel satisfied that it's got enough information, just hit the tab key and it will fill in the rest. So let's say they want 1,000 purple widgets. I'm going to just abbreviate right there. I'm going to hit the tab key. I'm going to type in 1,000. The estimate is $90. Now what we can do is through QuickBooks email service, again, it's something you have to set up. I'm not going to go into that, but you can email directly from QuickBooks. The thing I don't like about that is it goes out through QuickBooks email servers, and you never really know if it got to the company for a lot of different reasons. So we can email the estimate, we can print it, and we can also, if we choose, hang on one second, when I hit the email by mistake. When we go to print it, we can see a preview, we can print an envelope, we can do different types of forms. But when we print it, it will go right to our printer and we can mail it. If you decide you want to save this as a PDF and then email it to them, you can go to File and go down to Save as PDF right there. There's another option to print the estimate right there. I'm going to click away from that. Now, let's assume we printed it, we sent it out, and we want to do a new estimate. I'm going to click on Save and New. Okay, we're all set. Now, let's say that we sent that estimate out, and they called us back and said, you know what, that estimate, we want to go ahead with the order. Well, the first reaction you might have is that you need to create an invoice for it, or at some point you're going to need to create an invoice. So I'm going to click on Create Invoices over here on the left, and I did that because the invoices were open. And again, let me point out one thing while we're here. This invoice is an invoice that we had paid. We've got a check. Now what's occurred to this invoice is we see on it that it says paid because we had received the payment on this invoice. So it stays in that order, but it now is marked paid. Click Next. I'm going to start typing in RRR Painting Company. I'm going to hit the Tab key. And what is occurring is a box pops up that says, hey, wait a minute, you're about to create an invoice, and you actually have an estimate in there from RRR Painting Company. Do you want to make this the invoice? If I click OK, what it does is it takes the estimate and it automatically converts it to an invoice, so I don't have to go in and type everything all over again. So you can take estimates, and I'm going to go back up to estimates, or go over to the left because that window is still open. Click on Create Estimates. And you'll see that these estimates are here and they're open, they're active. Now if we were in this area instead of starting to create an invoice, one of the options is I could have come up here and clicked on Create Invoice, and that's another way you would have created an invoice out of that estimate. So there's more than one way to do certain things in software in QuickBooks, so it's a great way to learn how to do things. In other words, it can sometimes be confusing because there's more than one way to do the same thing. Don't get too caught up on that. Again, you're not going to make too many mistakes because you're going to catch it if you find that you have reconciled on a regular basis. And a lot of companies don't, to be honest with you. Now, just to review the screen, right here on the screen we have what our estimate is up on the screen. We came back to Create Invoice, where what I had done is because I typed in RR Painting Company, it said, hey, wait a minute, you have an estimate from them. Would you like to use the estimate to create an invoice? I said, okay, and now we have the invoice. So now, again, I can print this out and mail it. I can save it as a PDF. I can email it right over to the people so they get it. Now, again, when you send out email through QuickBooks, they send it through their email servers, and I don't see it go through my email system, so I never am sure it really actually physically went out. A way around that, when you send an email, and I'll just show you this because I've got it set up. Now the reason this came up is because as I was about to send the invoice, it's finalizing the invoice by doing a spell check. I'm just going to click ignore. And when you type in a person's email address right here, in the setup process for our painting company, it does ask you for an email address. I did not put one in. If I put an email address in right now, what it will do is it will prompt you and save that email address for our painting company. So the next time you go to email them an invoice, it will automatically fill in their email address. As a way to make sure that they get the email, what I recommend is blind carbon copy it to yourself. So as you send it to them via email, send it to them or yourself blind carbon copy, so you can assume if you got it, they got it. But having said that, you never are sure with email because of the fact that we have to deal with spam filters and all kinds of issues related to that. So a lot of times if you do want to do it this way, what I do recommend is you make a follow-up phone call just to make sure they got it. And in the previous session I talked about a tool called Message Tag, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that if you want to talk to me after the class. So I'm going to click cancel because I don't want to do it this way.